Welcome back to the Encounter Faith Podcast. My name is Ross, and I get the privilege of having these conversations on a regular basis. And today is a special bonus episode because I wanted to make sure that we all mark the end of what I think is a very significant series here at Good Shepherd. So joining me is Pastor Pamela Palmer. Thank you for coming back to the podcast, Pamela.
Thank you for having me.
So one of the things that stood out to me about this Anatomy of the Soul series is this is a conversation that is both somewhat, I would argue, overdue for Good Shepherd, but also it's a conversation that you don't see happening in many churches. A conversation about mental health, a series where we brought in outside experts like Amy Simpson, where all of our pastors were able to share their own unique perspectives. What I'm curious about for you is when you think about a series like this, why is it so important for us to talk about mental health as a church, both us specifically, but the Big C Church broadly?
Good Shepherd is doing something really unique by making space for conversations like this. And it's not the first time. When I started at Good Shepherd, they were already established in having conversations around mental health. Pastors would share their own stories around mental health. I think this is such a huge and unique and special thing about our church.
Yeah.
Lots of churches won't even touch anything around mental health because they don't know, or they're scared, or liability, or all of that. And sometimes it also just has to do with, this is what God is calling us to. And so I think Good Shepherd has this nudge from the Lord that we have had for years and continue to have. And so this series just kind of continues the work that has already been done. And so I think for us as a church that we're able to embrace this topic and not shy away from it is just a huge step in the right direction, because people are body and mind and emotions, and we have spiritual capacities. Like, we cannot deny that that is who we are as full people. I think our physical bodies are very obvious, and so we spend a lot of time on them, right? We're worried about how they look, what the health condition is. We do a lot with our bodies. And so it's very easy to sort of ignore the part of ourselves that we don't see.
Sure.
And that is very much part of who we are. That is who God has made us to be. It makes us as human beings special. And that is part of how we are made in the image of God. And so I think for us as a church, like, we know that. And it's not just something our pastors and staff are passionate about. It's something our congregation is passionate about. And our community is not, our community also, like our local Naperville community, they too like highlight.
Yeah. They expect it from us, right? Like they expect that this is a conversation we continue to lead into.
Yeah.
Something that you said stood out to me it reminded me of how Amy Simpson, who started this series, described it, of the church is full of fearful but well-intended people. Meaning that especially around this conversation around mental health, like, this is not always true, but for those of us who have heard, I'll say, the church's worst responses to these conversations, in most of those cases, those folks thought they were saying the right thing, thought they were doing that, they were well-intended, even though what they said caused a lot of hurt, caused a lot of damage. And one of the things that I think is such a unique opportunity for us, particularly at Good Shepherd, but also as a church in this area broadly, is we have some resources to help. We are able to not only have pastoral care and encouraging words, we're able to connect people to mental health professionals. We're able to offer groups that support people in their darkest moments. Can you just, if someone's brand new to Good Shepherd or brand new to interacting with a church like ours, can you help folks understand a little bit of the scope of what we offer here at Good Shepherd that helps people navigate all seasons of their mental health?
I'll start kind of large umbrella when I talk about this, because the stigma is such it's a big reality, right? Yeah. Like culturally. So in some ways, we are talking more about mental health than ever before.
Sure.
And I think more than ever before, some of the shame has come down and some of that stigma has decreased. but the work still needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I think the reality is because there still is this lingering stigma, what we do as a church matters even more. Because if someone has a mental health issue, most of the places they walk into, they know that they can't mention that. They have to pretend that that doesn't exist, or they just totally have to deny that and they do nothing. We want to be a church that welcomes people for all of who they are. It's not about keeping up a facade or that we have to have it all together because we're Christians. That is not a healthy way to live. And so we as a church, like, we have set up our ministries and our perspectives so that people can come here and know that it's okay if I'm not okay. It's okay if I'm struggling with my mental health. And that's why we have certain ministries that help people come into this space and actually know that they're safe in this space and have a place here to process and have vulnerable community and intentional spaces for them. So when we talk about the scope of what we do, I first want to highlight our Hope team. They have been around since, I believe, 2018, so before my time here at Good Shepherd. And it was a group of congregants. Some of them are licensed professionals in the mental health community, and others have been touched by mental health, whether it was themselves or a family member. And they just got together and they said, we want to raise awareness and we want to fight some of the stigma. And that was their main goal. Like, we just want to get this conversation out there and going. And they had support from our pastors and our staff from the start, which is remarkable. And that is what our team continues to do. They raise awareness by hosting different events. They fight the stigma by being present and saying, we're here. We recognize this about humanity. They also can do a really great job of connecting someone confidentially with a local mental health resource. Sometimes when you're going through a mental health challenge, you have no idea where to start.
Right.
And fortunately, when our congregants feel that way, they do reach out to the church. Maybe that's connecting with a pastor. Maybe that's getting paired with a care minister that can confidentially walk with you and be there to listen and to offer prayer support. And we also have this team that is dedicated to finding the right resource for someone who comes and requests to be connected with a local mental health resource. So when someone reaches out to me, I get some more information. Are you looking for family counseling, individual counseling? Are you looking for a diagnosis for a child? And our team then, because they are all out in the community doing the work of raising awareness and connecting around mental health, they're able to identify some specific resources for people. And it's been such a win that we can do that for our congregants and really anybody who were to reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling. Where can I find some help?
Yeah, I love that, because I think it's important for folks who are involved in the church, in any church, but particularly here at Good Shepherd, to recognize that this is how the community still views the church. In all of the conversation that is happening culturally about the church's decreasing influence, which is unfortunately largely true, one thing that the church still has is a frontline care position for folks who are in crisis. There's a lot of data to suggest that, but I also think it logically fits in for people when they think about times in their life where they have gone to crisis. Going to a church is pretty high up on that list, as you're just trying to, like you said, you didn't know where to start. You're just trying to navigate through, put one foot in front of the other.
Well, oftentimes it's when we go through a difficult challenge in our life that someone might actually start to consider, is God around? Is church a space where I can maybe find some support or even start to understand where God is in the midst of what I'm going through?
Yeah. And the thing that I also really appreciate about it, leaning into the conversation like we're trying to do here, is it also offers a chance for folks who have a misconception of what it means to have a mental health challenge, right? Like, I think we've tried to be very intentional about how we use words like mental health crisis, because, well, those are obviously real and specific. I think sometimes in this conversation, folks tend to go, oh, well, someone else has it worse, so therefore I don't need to engage. And what I see in the context of my own life group, but in the context of the connection that happens here, is that you can belong on your best days, you can belong on your worst days, and you can belong in all of your in-between days. And I think what we're able to accomplish here is very easy for other churches to pick up on, but many churches, like you were alluding to earlier, feel ill-equipped. One of the things that I'm curious about for you, you step into an environment here at Good Shepherd where, like you were saying, this was already in the water. This was already something that existed at your time when you started. There wasn't necessarily, the structure might have looked a little bit different, I think is fair for me to say. What have you noticed about how you can continue this conversation and continue raising awareness over a sustained period of time that moves something from being just kind of like in the water and understood to stated, championed, and ultimately able to be like driven out into the community?
It definitely takes congregants who are willing to be part of this.
Yeah.
Because I see, like, in my time here at Good Shepherd and starting up our care ministries and more than what we already had, and our Hope team growing and developing, it takes willing congregants who have it on their heart. And I always get really excited. I actually just had someone this past Sunday come up to me and say how she was interested in getting involved with care ministry. And I just love that, because I'm like, Lord, you are doing something. Like, you're laying this on people's hearts. Like, you are stirring up people's passion for wanting to support each other. And so if we have willing congregants who want to serve and who want to partner, then I think sky's the limit.
Yeah.
Right. Like, then we have lots of opportunities. We had a dementia event a couple weeks ago, and we were able to learn from 2 women who are on the Naperville Senior Task Force. And we had 50 congregants present, and we learned an incredible amount around dementia. Following that, there's been this group that's like, how can we keep going with this? How can we get momentum gaining? How can we create more spaces to learn and engage and support those who are impacted or have that person in their life that's touched by dementia? And so I think that's what it is. Some of these things happen really organically, which is beautiful and awesome. And you can see like the Spirit moving. But I also think it takes intentional decisions. Like, we also have to be willing. And I think we've made some great partnerships with organizations in the community. I'll just, talk about SamariCare. The fact that we have that partnership with them, that's a place where we can refer some folks who are looking for a local mental health resource. I serve on the board at SamariCare. And so just getting to learn more about what they're doing and help support them in that mission is huge.
Sure.
And there's a lot of congregants that also support SamariCare and what they're doing, because they know that mental health reality and it's touched their own lives or that of a loved one. And so there's this heart. So I think those partnerships are really important. Even in us hosting a mental health first aid workshop, what a great partnership that is with another nationwide organization that's equipping anybody who is willing to learn and be trained, so that when they encounter someone who lives with mental health issues, they know how to talk to that person. Earlier, you were like, well, a lot of times we don't even know what to say when someone shares about their mental health. You're right.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't come naturally. And I think just having been in the care setting for, the entirety of my ministry years, it has taken me a lot to learn how to be with people in those spaces and how to be present and genuine and really walk with them in the way that's going to help them. And so a partnership like that is really crucial, and that we continue to be intentional to make those partnerships and keep the momentum going. Without those 2 pieces, our congregants who are behind us and intentional partnerships, I think it becomes really difficult to keep things going. But it is in my heart and for our pastors and our entire staff, there is such support behind this. And so I think the sermon series has really just launched us in a big way. And
Sure.
I foresee that this is not just something that we're talking about in January and maybe a slice of February, but that we can just keep carrying with us.
Yeah. I want to ask you about that. So in your pastoral responsibilities, what I'm curious about is, this is obviously a very natural inflection point. It's a teaching series. There's extended resources and workshops like you're describing. I would encourage folks to check out gshepchurch.org/anatomy of the soul, where we've consolidated all of the sermon conversations, the podcast conversations, as well as additional resources. And that's linked in the show notes wherever you're listening. But just for sake of putting a timeline to it, how do you hope our congregants are thinking about this conversation in, we'll say, July, that's maybe different than how they were thinking about it in January because of this series? Like, are there specific things you can point to?
My hope is that this series reminds us that our mental health is important and that it's okay for us to admit that and to acknowledge that. And that if anybody needs to take that step to talk to somebody or to connect with someone, or even just to start getting involved in a purposeful community, whether that's through a life group or a Bible study or any of the amazing things that we have going on here at Good Shepherd, that would just encourage them.
Sure.
That we could recognize as individuals that the series is challenging us to remember, like, oh yeah, I need to take care of myself too. And I also hope that as much as it gives us that internal perspective, like, am I keeping check on myself? And I'm not just thinking about that right now because the series is going on, but that we fully embrace and accept that part of ourselves and that we're always mindful of it, just like we are our bodies.
Right.
But that also we'd have an external outlook as well, that we're paying attention to the people around us. Do we see signs of someone struggling? Do we see spaces that we could enter in to be that supportive or caring person, whether it's through a specific ministry or just a friendship or relationship that you are in? But that, again, we're not just learning about this for 4 weeks and then going on with our lives, but like, can it shape and inform how we see ourselves and how we see the world in front of us?
So last thing I want to ask you about is, for you, I'm thinking about the person who's still listening to this. They are someone who is looking for something. They're looking to be more than just go through a 4-week series. They're looking to be shaped and transformed. So as a sort of last word, I'm curious, like, what from this series, whether from preparing for your own message or the resources or what you've heard through the series, what do you feel like has helped shape you in your walk with Jesus?
I think the recognition that God is with me, that God is with us, plays such a huge part in shaping who I am as a person, shaping my understanding of faith and my understanding of God. In the sermon I preached a couple weeks ago, I talked about, I talked about the story of Job and how he kind of just cursed the day he was born. He thought nothing would bring him relief but death. I talked about my own struggles that I had, a decade and a half ago now, though in some ways it feels like it was just yesterday because it was such a powerful experience of confronting some of the pain and sorrow in my own life, and how I walked with a counselor so that I could sift through that and process and find my way. But I also experienced what I believe is this miraculous healing work of God, that through a counselor, through the supportive friends and family that I had, I was able to find my way to health and wholeness and sort of a restored perspective on my own pain. And I also talked about in the sermon God's presence, his peace, and his people being vital to our healing, to our wholeness, and to experiencing, I think, life in the way that it's supposed to be experienced. And so that goes back to, like, if we know that God is with us and we lean into his presence, like, his presence is for us. He's not just present for his own, like, he created us and his presence is for us and it is accessible. Same with his peace. I love how scripture talks about the fact that Jesus gives us peace and it serves the purpose of guarding our hearts and our minds. Like, I want my heart and my mind guarded by God's peace. Absolutely. So that is for us and also his people. Oftentimes when we are struggling, we isolate and we push people away And we think that no one is going to understand, that no one's going to want to help. We think that we're alone, but the opposite is true. I think people do want to help each other out.
Mm-hmm.
I think we really are just waiting for those opportunities of like, oh, you're struggling? How can I help you? But we start to think, no, I got to do this myself. Nobody cares. It's just not true. And so I think if we can overcome some of those obstacles in our own mind and remember, like, part of our healing, part of coming through something is actually leaning into people, his people, God's people. And so I think that's the beauty of what Good Shepherd does, is that we actually have space for that here at our church through our care ministries, through our adult ministries. You mentioned life groups quite a few times. Like, those are spaces where real connection and belonging happen.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran. And our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.